The mirrors of Versailles caught the morning sun and scattered it like fire. Light rippled across marble floors, across the silk of courtiers' gowns, across the face of a king who believed himself divine. Louis XIV, the Sun King, the center of all things. Yet even in that sea of gold, something darker stirred. Beneath the powder, beneath the perfume, beneath the glow of 1,000 candles, there was a smell. It drifted through the corridors like an unseen specter, thick, sweet, and rancid. It clung to drapes, to velvet chairs, to the very air itself. Those who served the king learned to breathe shallowly when he entered. They bowed, smiled, and endured. None dared speak of what they smelled, but everyone knew. Louis XIV had begun to rot from within. His downfall started with sweetness. The kitchens of Versailles were a kingdom of sugar, cakes, syrups, candied fruits, honeyed wine. He loved it all. Each bite was another step toward decay. His teeth blackened, cracked, and bled. His physicians, bound by superstition rather than science, believed infected teeth poisoned the blood. They ordered extractions. The king obeyed. The first teeth came out cleanly, the rest did not. Bone splintered, flesh tore. When they reached the upper jaw, the surgeon pressed too hard. A wound opened between the mouth and the sinus, a narrow passage that refused to heal. Air and liquid crossed where they should not. From that day, the king's breath carried the scent of infection. Whispers spread that his words themselves were foul. One mistress claimed she could taste the rot when he kissed her. Another fainted at the smell of his breath. But historians agree this was only palace gossip. What cannot be disputed, however, is that the wound never closed and the king's odor became legendary. Doctors burned the opening with iron, hoping to seal it. The air filled with the hiss of flesh and the sharp sting of scorched bone. Courtiers waiting outside pressed handkerchiefs to their faces, their silks trembling as the screams faded into silence. The king survived the pain, but the smell returned. It would haunt him until death. Without teeth, he could no longer chew properly. Food passed almost untouched through his body. Yet his appetite grew monstrous. He ate as if trying to fill the emptiness within him. Roasted meats, heavy creams, sugared fruits. His stomach swelled. His bowels rebelled. Servants whispered that his digestion had turned against him. Rumors told of worms living inside the king, feeding on his royal flesh. Some claimed his insatiable hunger came from a tapeworm that stretched the length of his body. Yet many believe this is a myth rather than documented fact. The true record shows years of purges and enemas, endless efforts to balance the humors of a body that refused to obey. Versailles itself was no cleaner than its king. Beneath the chandeliers and gold leaf, the palace reeked. There were no proper drains, no sewers. Chamber pots overflowed. Servants emptied them out of windows or hid them behind curtains. In summer, the heat turned waste to vapor. It mingled with perfume, with candle smoke, with sweat. The result was unbearable. Visitors wrote of fainting in corridors. Ladies stepped carefully around dark stains on the marble. Even the gardens bursting with flowers could not drown the scent. Yet Louis demanded more fragrance. He ordered the palace to smell of paradise. Every chamber was assigned a perfume. Orange blossom for the morning, rose for the evening, jasmine for the king's bed. The perfumers of France became his alchemists. They mixed oils and powders in secret recipes, blending heaven to conceal hell. Musk, amber, lavender, and clove filled the air like armor. But even perfume has limits. When Louis entered a room, the scent shifted. Beneath the sweetness lay something metallic, something living. Some said he carried scented gloves to disguise the odor of his hands. Others whispered that he could no longer detect it, that years of perfume had dulled his senses. What cannot be denied is that Versailles became the most perfumed place in Europe because its ruler could not escape the stench of his own body. In time, the obsession became ritual. Scent was power. Fragrance meant control. To smell divine was to be divine. Yet the irony lingered like smoke. The man who built a palace of light and air ruled from a body of decay. The courtiers knew. They bowed lower each year, their smiles tight, their nostrils flaring. They pretended the air was pure. They spoke of divine fragrance, of holiness that made them dizzy. In truth, they feared what that smell foretold. It was more than sickness. It was a warning. The body of the king had become the body of France, and both were beginning to rot. By the end of his reign, the Golden Court of France had become a monument to denial. Every mirror reflected splendor, but behind the glass was corrosion. The courtiers moved like painted statues through corridors thick with musk and candle soot. They smiled through nausea. To serve the king was to serve the smell. The doctors of Versailles kept their distance. They spoke softly, dressed finely, and performed miracles of appearance. To the world, they cured the king. In truth, they bled him, purged him, burned him, and called it mercy. Each cure drew new wounds. The more they tried to cleanse him, the more his body rebelled. Louis endured it with pride. Pain was proof of his divinity. He believed that suffering made him sacred, that endurance was the crown of kings. So he ate, smiled, and performed his rituals while his body failed in silence. The mornings began in ceremony. Servants entered his chamber as sunlight struck the mirrors. They opened the curtains, lit incense, and filled basins with rosewater. The king was washed, not with water from a bath, but with linen dipped in scented oils. He had long feared that water could seep into the skin and cause illness. So he remained dry, cleansed by fragrance alone. He changed linen 3 times a day. His shirt smelled of violet and amber. His hair was dusted with powder, his hands gloved in perfume. When he passed through the hall of mirrors, the air shimmered with scent and smoke. Yet even beneath that avalanche of fragrance, a sour edge persisted. Whispers spread that the smell of the king could not be conquered. It was a curse, the judgment of heaven upon a man who had dared to mimic God. Some said angels had withdrawn from him, leaving only mortals to endure the punishment. Many historians believe this is a myth, born from fear and envy. What cannot be denied is that his own court began to fear his body as much as they worshipped his power. At night, the scent deepened. The tapestries absorbed it. The pillows breathed it back. Servants opened windows and lit more incense, but the air grew heavy again before dawn. It seemed to seep from the walls themselves. Versailles became a temple built around a single mortal odor. Beyond the palace gates, the peasants of France lived among the same decay. Disease moved through villages like smoke, unwashed bodies crowding narrow streets. The king's stench was only the royal version of theirs, gilded in perfume and ritual. In that way, he was not apart from his people. He was their mirror. When he walked among courtiers, the smell followed like a herald of mortality. Perfume could not hide the truth of flesh. No crown could halt the rot that begins at birth. His enemies called it poetic justice. His followers called it divine mystery. Inside the palace, the perfumers continued their war. They brewed new scents each season. Rose layered with mint, bergamot with musk, spices from the east, crushed flowers from the royal gardens. They burned incense in copper bowls and scattered petals on the floors. The result was suffocating. The air was so dense with fragrance that courtiers carried their own salts to stay conscious. Louis did not notice. He believed the world smelled as it should. His nose had been conquered by habit. To him, decay was simply the cost of splendor. Yet decay spreads. The filth of Versailles reached its fountains. Water darkened with rot from hidden drains. The marble cracked. Rats appeared in cellars. The palace shimmered above a foundation of waste, just as France glittered above its starving peasants. The same illusion, the same denial. Some courtiers whispered that the king's body and his kingdom were the same organism, that his festering wound was France itself, devouring its own health. They feared that when the smell grew unbearable, the kingdom would collapse. And still, the king lived on. He ruled longer than any monarch before him. Decades passed while the odor deepened. It became part of the air, part of the legend. Visitors from foreign courts wrote of beauty so dazzling it hurt to look at, and a smell that made it hard to breathe. Versailles was paradise from afar, and a pestilence up close. Louis XIV had achieved what no mortal had before him. He had made even corruption divine. In the final years, the light of Versailles began to dim. The king's body could no longer obey the mask he demanded. His legs swelled with ulcers that refused to close. Each step sent waves of pain through his bones. The infection in his jaw never healed. His skin turned waxen, his breath fouler still. The Sun King, once the radiant heart of Europe, was now surrounded by the odor of death. Servants burned more incense. Candles crowded his chamber like sentries. Curtains were drawn to keep the flies away. The perfumers arrived at dawn, carrying vials of rose oil and amber essence. They dabbed his sheets, his gloves, his pillow. It made no difference. The smell had entered his flesh. It was no longer something he carried. It was what he had become. Whispers spread beyond the palace. Travelers told of a ruler whose breath could wilt flowers, of rooms so fragrant they sickened guests, of a palace that shone like heaven but reeked like a grave. Many of these tales were gossip, born from hatred or awe. The true record shows that Louis was dying from gangrene, and that the air in his chambers had turned sour with decay. He endured it with royal composure. Even in agony, he followed the ritual. He rose at dawn, received his ministers, touched the sick, and blessed his people. To the end, he believed himself chosen by God. Perhaps that belief was his final perfume, masking the fear beneath. When he died in 1715, the courtiers wept and bowed as the priests began their prayers. But as the hours passed, the stench grew unbearable. His body had begun to decompose before the last blessing was spoken. The scent that had haunted Versailles now filled it completely. Servants rushed to seal the windows, but the air turned thick and warm. The Sun King's final offering to his kingdom was the smell of mortality. For days, the palace reeked of him. Perfume could not win that last battle. The gardens bloomed in vain. Even the fountains seemed to falter, their waters sluggish beneath the summer heat. The legend of the most powerful man in Europe ended not with thunder or war, but with a smell that no one could forget. Yet the irony survived him. The same scent that had once inspired disgust became a symbol of grandeur. Historians would call his court the Golden Age of France. Artists would paint him as immortal light. None would admit how human he truly was, how fragile, how foul. The story of Louis XIV is the story of illusion itself. The idea that power can conceal decay, that a crown can sanctify flesh. But perfume fades, mirrors tarnish, and every body returns to dust. Versailles was not only a palace, it was a mask. And when the mask cracked, the truth beneath was unbearable. The courtiers who once praised his radiance now whispered of curses. They said that the king's spirit still lingered in the walls, that on still nights, a strange sweetness hangs in the corridors. They claimed it was the last breath of Louis XIV, trapped in the gold he built. Many believe this is a myth rather than recorded fact. What cannot be disputed, however, is that the legend of his stench endured far longer than the perfume he loved. His name remains carved in marble. His portrait still stares down from museum walls. But behind the gilded smile lies a darker legacy. The body that betrayed divinity, the scent that betrayed glory. He ruled for 72 years, and in the end, not even God's chosen could escape the smell of being human. The light fades. The mirrors darken. Versailles sleeps beneath centuries of dust. Yet the question lingers, faint as breath through an open door. If even the Sun King could not mask his decay, what ruler ever truly can?